everyone, and welcome back to the next episode of Tilly. I'm your host, Marissa Zeppieri Caruana. A lot of you already know me as Lupus Chick. If this is your first time here, Tilly is brought to you by the Lupus Foundation of New England. We are in our 12th season. If you want to, you can go back and see we have a video library of over 60 episodes. And in every episode, we either interview someone that has lupus or chronic illness, or is a caregiver, or is part of the medical or pharmaceutical or even complementary therapy fields. So there's a lot of information. You can check out the video libraries either here on Facebook or also on YouTube. So recently on Instagram, we had a conversation and a post about reasonable accommodations in the workplace. And we were really surprised just how many people were not aware of the American with Disabilities Act, and also what you can ask for if you are an employee and what your rights are. So this is a very general overview, but one of the things that I wanted to focus on in this episode of Tilly was what kind of reasonable accommodation can you ask for? So the first thing I wanted to just go over so that we know the right language. So bear with me because I'm going to read this directly. I want to make sure that I don't say something that isn't correct. But the Americans with Disability Act requires any employer that has 15 or more employees to provide reasonable accommodations for individuals with disabilities unless it would cause undue hardship on the employer. So I know a lot of people ask, well, if I were to go back to work, I just don't know if I can stand up for 8 hours, if I can do a full shift, or if I can do a full 40 hours a week in the actual workplace. Can I bring my animal with me if I have a service animal? Like, there's so many questions. And I think just from some of the comments that we get from social media and whatnot, or private messages, I think because there aren't a lot of direct answers out there, it's just not something that you either have to be sort of put in that situation, or speak to someone that's already been through it, or someone maybe who is an attorney and is more familiar with these things. You just don't know. And I feel like that might maybe prohibit some people or cause them to sort of just feel like maybe they just can't work because somebody won't understand their condition. Now, yes, personally, I've had employers that really don't understand chronic illness or lupus, but I feel like more and more people are beginning to understand about chronic illness. And I think a lot of that has to do with COVID. There are a lot more opportunities now for work at home, for remote and even hybrid opportunities. And because it was something that affected basically the entire world, and a lot of people understood, with like long haul COVID and whatnot, just needs had to change when it came to working and being in the workforce. So I wanted to kind of go over just some reasonable accommodations that I've been familiar with. And also, I asked a couple of people, what are some reasonable accommodations? And I found some really great examples through some people that offered their own information that I wanted to share with you. And you can sort of take these and think about your own personal situation and what you might want to go and speak to your employer about. Now, there is a great website. It's eeoc.gov. And it was interesting because when I went and looked at what they consider reasonable accommodations, they had a bunch of examples. And one of the examples actually had to do with lupus. So I wanted to read this to you directly. Example B. A cashier easily becomes fatigued because of lupus and as a result has difficulty making it through her shift. The employee requests a stool because sitting can greatly reduce her fatigue. This accommodation is reasonable because it is a common sense solution to remove a workplace barrier being required to stand when the job can also be effectively performed sitting down. This reasonable accommodation is effective because it addresses the employee's fatigue and enables her to perform her job. And it doesn't put an undue hardship on the employer. They just need to provide her with a stool. And something so simple like that, those of us who have lupus, who have chronic illness, we know standing up for 8 hours can be really difficult. Even standing in a shower, for 10, 15 minutes can be exhausting. We've talked a lot here about shower chairs and shower stools and things like that. So if you're somewhere, on a cash register, or you have a long shift and that can be done partially by sitting down, that's a reasonable accommodation. So I asked a couple of other people, and here are some others that I found. One specifically with lupus and also other autoimmune diseases that deal with photosensitivity. We've talked about this before on here, but with lupus, if you are under fluorescent lights or even incandescent lights, these can actually trigger flare-ups or trigger lupus symptoms. It's different in everyone because not everyone with lupus has photosensitivity, but a large portion of lupus patients do. So being under fluorescent lights for 4, 8, however long hours your shift is, it can trigger things like fevers, rashes, joint pain, fatigue, and full-on flares. Think about it, if you're under those lights 40 hours a week and you happen to have photosensitivity, it's something simple of explaining this to your employer and asking for different types of light bulbs. Or if that's not possible, for your desk or station to be moved to a different area where you aren't under specifically these types of lights for that long of a period. So it could be something as simple as light bulbs or just changing your area, your workspace, right? So speaking of changing areas of workspace, I had a friend who offered some information that she personally dealt with. So she deals with Crohn's and colitis. And, that was her biggest barrier of where she was currently working, was that she had to travel a long way to get to the restroom. And when you have an illness like that, like sometimes there's just an urgency and you need to be close by. So her reasonable accommodation request was to please move her desk somewhere closer to a restroom. And they did. And it made all of the difference, because just the anxiety of knowing that she was far away was, bringing extra stress on top of how she was physically feeling. So something like that, it is a reasonable request. It helps her do her job better, and it doesn't cause this hardship on the employer. It's actually very simple. So other things like service animals or support animals, those are requests that you can make. And other things that I wanted to talk about are rest breaks, which make me think of your schedule. I feel like post-COVID, the 40-hour work week has changed a lot. So whether you're part-time, whether you're full-time, you may be able to request that your schedule is maybe at night. Perhaps during the day, that's when you do your infusions. That's when you do your doctor's appointments. So maybe some part of the week you need afternoon and nighttime hours. This is a reasonable request. Maybe you need to work solely from home and have a remote position. If this job can be done from home, it doesn't require you actually being on site, that's a reasonable request. These are all things that you can discuss with your employer. And maybe breaking up the schedule. Maybe you need to have a gap in the middle of the day, whether it's 4 doctor's appointments, whether it's 2 rest. And I had a position once where I would work in the afternoon, and this is when I was in journalism many years ago. And then they would let me go home and finish all of my stories and send them in from home, because I was able to go home, take a nap, be refreshed, and then work on my stories, and then be able to send them in on time so that those stories could publish either later that night or the following day. So, it really depends on the type of position you have. But I feel like whether you're in retail, whether you're in sales or computers or journalism or media, there are different types of opportunities, and it really just depends on your workplace and the type of accommodations that you can ask for. Also, another type of reasonable accommodation, and you can go online, you could look up the Americans with Disabilities Act and just type in what are reasonable accommodation examples. There's some great blogs out there. There's some great material directly from the government site. I feel like you get a lot more specific information when you look up different websites or blogs of people that are chronically ill, because some of them have really interesting examples of reasonable accommodations that they've asked for. But one person was actually talking about modifying equipment because they often were in a wheelchair, and just the way the desks were set up and the keyboards and whatnot. Um, I think this person was in IT, so they had a lot of different keyboards around them and the way that the desk needed to be set up. But it was just modifying the way the equipment was all worked out so that it could make it easier for them. You know, it's a one-time, hopefully, fix on the employer's part, but it makes all the difference for the employee, and they're able to actually do their job properly and be able to do it without extra hardship on them. So it's a win-win for the employer and the employee. Now, there are, limitations with the ADA, and there has to have that need that's proven that you have these needs. So sometimes you need to work with the HR department, and there are government websites that really go into this more detailed. There are attorney websites that go into this more detailed. You could look up American with Disabilities Act. You can look up the EEOC, and you can just type in reasonable accommodations. Am I able to get a reasonable accommodation? Now, remember, you are protected under the law if the employer has 15 or more employees. That doesn't mean that if you work at a smaller company that, say, has 9 employees, that you can't ask for a stool, or you can always ask. I always tell people, like, the answer, you don't have an answer until you ask. And yes, obviously people can say no, but I feel like in today's world, especially post-COVID, a lot of employers are more willing and more understanding with chronic illness and chronic health problems. And our workforce obviously has taken a hit, and there are a lot of jobs out there that aren't filled. There are a lot of employers out there that are having a hard time finding workers. And I know people in the chronic illness community, they're incredible. They're hard workers. They're highly intelligent, and they are just amazing assets to our workforce. And sometimes we just need an accommodation or two to be able to do the job, the right way and make an actual impact in our workforce. So I just felt like this was a really important topic. I hope to one day have an expert here to kind of dig into this more if it's a topic that interests all of you. But for right now, this is a great start. You can find a lot of research online, and of course, feel free to ask any questions below. Or if you have personally asked for an accommodation that is different than the ones that I named off here, feel free to leave it in the comments, because I feel like it helps people just sort of kind of tailor it to their own situation, and kind of gets the wheels turning of, okay, you know what, something like that would actually really help me at work. I had someone say that light bulbs really trigger the rash and the fever. Someone that I know that has lupus, and she had no idea. One, she had no idea that certain light bulbs could do that. And two, she had no idea that she can ask that the light bulbs be changed or that her location be changed. So just simple information. And if you have anything you want to share, we would love to see it below. So I just want to thank all of you, and thanks for your patience over the last few weeks as we were having some reruns of TILLY because I moved. And I just want to thank the Lupus Foundation of New England. Be sure to go back into our video library. There's so many different topics there. And I appreciate you guys hanging out with me this evening. And I look forward to seeing you all next Tuesday at 8 o'clock Eastern. And I hope you all have a good night. Take care.